You keep mentioning manufacturing, but just exactly where is the manufacturing and what are they manufacturing? Because most everywhere you go, you hear about the unemployment rate of the 18 to 30-year-olds.
Okay, well, there are two parts to that answer. So all kinds of things get manufactured. Anything from frozen pizzas to, you name it, gets produced in this part of the world. Lots of stuff gets produced. Other types of, you can buy a cup that I have that says made on Saudi Arabia in it, for instance, sort of a reusable coffee cup that says that. Almost all kinds of things produced. Textiles are also produced in this part of the world. All kinds of things are. Now, the second part of that question is, are those 18 to 20-year-olds working in those factories? No, they're not. Oftentimes, foreigners are working in those factories, and so that's part of that disconnect that's there. But indeed, Saudi Arabia produces things. Saudi Arabia also produced wheat in large numbers. Saudi Arabia 10 to 15 years ago was the fourth largest wheat exporter in the world, or among the top wheat exporters. Again, if you pour enough money into something, you can, like the Shah did in the 70s, you can pick up factories and drop them down and just let them go. Remember, for them, they have one enormous advantage, which is that because they have a lot of oil, their energy use is not going to be as much of a price as it would be putting in other parts of the world. And that's something that is a definite distinct advantage. And their labor costs they can keep lower.
Just to add to that, I think they are targeting those industries that consume a lot of electricity, like aluminum.
Right. Thank you. Aluminum petrochemicals is another one. That's another key industry. Again, aluminum and petrochemicals are natural byproducts of petroleum production and can make a significant amount of money. I should add, though, that the challenge to that is that a lot of those industries need water as well, and this is not a part of the world in which water is an ample supply. And so developing desalination plants to make that work and using water effectively are a challenge in the future without question.
What impact, if any, do you see on this issue of the women and their new role in the region to the issue of Islamization, the Islamic movements?
Interesting. Islamic movements have been of multiple minds of this. It depends on where you are. In Kuwait, for instance, Islamic movements openly opposed granting the right to vote to women. But as that came about, Islamic movements realized that, okay, these women are going to happen, we're going to need to support them. And for instance, they provided cassette tapes of individual politicians. And I should add that there are women who are not necessarily comfortable with the type of reforms promoted by particularly some of the women in business. There are conservative women in these societies who oppose a lot of these reforms. And one sees, just as in the United States with the event of women on both sides of the political spectrum, that Islamic groups are going to be able to draw on those women as well. If I'm getting sort of what you're at, that's the first thing. The second thing is integration. These Islamic groups will work with these women over a period of time, and there's a tug of war that's going on. But the Islamic groups, in the longer run, in terms of Islamization, can't get around the fact that these women are going to be the ones who are best positioned to work in modern economies. That's something they simply can't get around in the long run.
What do you feel is happening to, as you have more and more urbanization and they're further and further away from their roots, what's happening to the culture of the Gulf states?
That's an issue that I talked about in passing. There is a fear among many Gulf nationals, you'll hear this, about that we are disappearing as a culture. That one Emirati writer went to a Starbucks or went to a type of restaurant and noticed he's the only one wearing the Galabia in the outfit. And there's a definite fear that they are going to disappear as a culture, and indeed governments have made tremendous investments in this part of the world in promoting social culture. If you go, say, in Bahrain, where I was in March, huge investments are being made in old homes, in the museums. Has anyone seen museums in the Gulf? Yeah, they're gorgeous. I mean, if you want an example of how to preserve history, that's a way to do that. I think these societies and cultures are evolving and are facing, to be frank, the same questions we are here. The types of questions about culture and other things aren't that different than what the folks in Arizona are now dealing with. Indeed, dealing with immigration issues coming in, those type of pull back and forth, how to integrate. My bet is that these societies are going to survive. They will evolve. And in fact, based on the historical record, they've been there a very, very long time. There's no reason to think they won't disappear. But are they going to look in the same way they are. Is English, for instance, going to be a language that will be as commonly spoken as Arabic? Yes, absolutely, in that way. Will you have the blend of those two? Yes, but I would bet that these cultures fundamentally aren't going to change in terms of overall structure. Are they still going to be conservative religious societies? Yes. Are women have exactly the same roles that they do in the West? No, but they will look probably closer to us in some way or form, just as we're evolving in this society.
Thank you. You alluded to the sovereign wealth fund losses. A couple of questions. Do you have any sense of the scale of some of those losses over the past year or two? And the second question is, as you know, there's a kind of a competition in the region for, which city will be the financial center for the region. Do you have a sense of whether one has to emerge or whether you can have 2 or 3 different centers?
In terms of the sovereign wealth funds have been enormous. I mean, we're talking in the billions of dollars, although they've not been quite as hit as badly as other parts of the world. Dubai in particular got hit very, very badly. I mean, Nakheel and the other, those property companies, but the losses are huge. Their balance sheets took really serious hits. We're talking, first of all, because they had enormous exposure in American markets. Look at the prime owner of Citibank is a Saudi. And he lost a lot of money. Granted, he has the money to lose, but even he at that point will lose that. So the losses are huge. They've been able to get some of that back, but that's important because in the past, when oil prices have declined, they've been able to sit on those cushions of those investments, sell those investments, and keep their industry and keep sort of everything stable. That's what they did, particularly in the early 80s when oil prices really went down for that first major shock. In terms of your second question, remind me of the second. Sure. Yeah, there's certainly competition for a financial hub. That Dubai wants to be, Bahrain wants to be, all together. I certainly think that the region is big enough and there's enough resources enough to do that. What I think will be probably an important determinant of that is the new currency, which is coming on, the Emirati, which the UAE is not in, and Oman is not in. And I don't know how that's going to impact the larger things, because that currency becomes a large reserve currency, means that it's going to be natural that one of the states, and this is why Bahrain wants into this, is going to emerge as a regional financial hub. I would expect that there'll be multiple ones, just there are in other parts of the world. There are multiple stock markets in the United States. Again, the same questions in China, whether Shanghai or Hong Kong will emerge as the dominant player. In Europe, whether Europe has Frankfurt and London and Paris are all fairly functioning stock markets in the international economy that people care about. No reason to think that can't happen in the Gulf.
Yeah, I know. Like, for example, during the Gulf War, the GCC was pretty paramount, and among other things, getting among U.S. air bases, but also just getting like Syria and Egypt on the side of the U.S. I was curious what you see like the geopolitical role of the GCC in the future. In between.
Let's back up. The GCC as an institution didn't do a heck of a lot during the Gulf War. That's an important thing to see. There were actually GCC bases, military bases in this war that were never mobilized. Indeed, individual Gulf governments did a lot of role, particularly the Kuwaitis and the Saudis did an enormous heavy lifting, not only allowing for air bases, but as an institution, the Gulf Cooperation Council didn't do that much, and indeed, it continues to be, like the European Union, another institution which it's clearly modeled on. Let's be clear about that. Has a tug and pull between both the needs of a group as a community to present themselves as a force in global affairs, negotiate trade agreements with, say, the Europeans, while also saving national interests. And as far as I can see, they're just like the Europeans going to continue muddling along in the future. That means that when there are issues of which they can work together, like, say, a trade zone, like the ability to allow people to move clearly between different parts of that zone, that will certainly happen. But in terms of other larger political issues, can it perform a larger union? That doesn't seem likely. And again, we can't expect it. The Europeans are far, far farther along on that road. And ask the Greeks about what it means to Europeans, or ask anyone outside of Germany what that means, and you'll get that same issue. Have you ever seen the causeway between, say, Bahrain and Saudi Arabia? As an example of what I mean by this integration. What do you have to buy if you're going from Bahrain to Saudi Arabia? To buy insurance. There's not, you have to stop and buy this specific insurance. There's not across, those basic types of issues you would think would be there. That's, again, why Bahrain has to be in whatever monetary union that Saudi Arabia is going to be part of.